We're back on the couch here with Rob Chiarelli, who has worked with a number of famous artists we all know, and I've had to write it on my pad here because there's so many. And I know you don't like talking about it, Rob, but I'm going to mention them. We've got Christina Agulera, Leanne Rimes, Will Smith, Mary Mary, Janet Jackson, Ricky Martin, and Ray Charles, to name a few. So there's some big acts there.
Good
so
stuff.
I'm sure you know what you're doing.
Vegas, real good.
So what do you do predominantly? Are you a recording engineer, mix engineer?
Yeah, mixing, primarily mixing, production work, and engineering.
And do you, maybe it might be good for budding engineers out there to sort of get your backstory of how you got in this position to be working with acts like this?
By the grace of God, and a lot of work, a lot of work. Well, the short story is, I've studied music since I was 12. Went to school for it, but, as a musician, not as an engineer.
Yeah.
Recorded with my band, toured with, did that sort of thing. Moved behind the scenes, did some recording in Miami, did some recording in New York.
Yeah. So you're always interested in the recording side of things in the band?
I got interested in it, pretty early on. I was really into all that, and I liked the technical part, and I liked the, it was fascinating to me from the beginning.
Yeah.
So.
And then so you left the band?
Our band broke up like they do.
Yeah.
Everybody went their separate ways.
Yeah.
And I decided that, I'm going to move behind the glass and see if I can, the joy was always being with the band and working with the band and developing the songs and developing, that sort of thing was always, I really loved doing that stuff. So when I moved behind the glass, it was easy for me. It was an easy transition. So I didn't like the road at all, like not even 1%. So
Really?
it was good to get out of there.
And did you did you learn in LA? What was your groundwork?
My first real experience was in Miami when I recorded with my group. And, we went through the whole, process of recording an album. And at that point, I was the musician. I was in the band. And then when the band broke up, I went to New York. I met a guy named Michael Lasko, who you've spoken to.
Yeah, we have. On
How
this
was
very
he?
couch.
Was he okay?
He was okay.
Okay.
He said nice things about you.
Love it. Okay, so so when I went to New York periodically to work with him, and learned a lot. So he was the producer. He produced some songs for me, and I asked more questions, and I think it took most of the time from the questions that I was asking than actual recording.
Yeah.
I just picked his brain to death, and that was really the beginning of it. And a few years later, I moved to LA, looked him up, kind of sunk my teeth in.
And was it a career choice to come to LA?
It was. I wanted to get, this is going to sound funny, but I wanted to get far enough away from Mommy that I couldn't just run home when times got tough.
Yeah,
if I went to New York, I could always just go right back to Boston. So I had to make it tough on myself. I mean, it's a crazy psychology. Yeah. But I needed to put myself in a position where I had to make it. I mean, I needed that extra thing. So that's why I really moved coast to coast. That was a big reason. And
then the studios, what was your training? I guess you mentioned before that you did the hard yards, which most engineers have to do, running and copies, bits and pieces.
Yeah, the first studio that hired me was Paramount, and I'd usually work the midnight shift, midnight to 8 a.m. and it was rough, but I loved it. I just I'd stay around the clock and just listen and learn from everybody who was willing to talk to me, and
so were they mixing at that time slot or recording as well?
Everything. I mean, that studio went round the clock, and I'll bet it's still going round the clock. So, I was just absorbing everything I could in the studio, learning from everyone I could, and, it just so happened that a group named Club Nouveau, who had a big song called Lean On Me, they were in there, and the guy, Jay King, was a great friend of mine to this day, had fired like everybody from the studio, and I was like the last guy left. so it was July 4th weekend, and no one was around to work, so they said, we have no choice. We'll try this kid Chiarelli, and we'll give him a shot.
Chiarelli.
Yeah.
Your time's up.
This guy would just, he was rough on engineers. He was rough on me, but we definitely hit it off. And for me, I was just a student. I was just, I was in there with a great producer. So
Yeah.
I was happy, and he found that, I could take the abuse, and that was the beginning of it all, really.
Which is one thing I think a lot of people have to realize about engineers is you're there to do a job, and they may abuse you. You're not the star at that moment.
You're never the star.
Never the star.
Nope. I don't know any engineering records where like the engineer's on the front.
Yeah.
I just don't know of any. Do you know any?
I'm trying to make myself one of those.
Okay,
but
good luck.
It's not working too well.
Well, no, I don't. It's the artist, the singer's on the front, and we're just behind the scenes. We're
Yeah.
making it all happen.
Exactly.
And that's an important thing to know.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, yeah.
So, big part of the job. It's not all knowing the technical stuff. It's not all knowing, the microphones and how to record it. It's a lot of it. It's a people business, isn't it? So
Yeah.
you have to interact with the artists and the record company and the producers, and
Yeah.
that's a big part of the engineering job.
Yeah, it's true. You have to know when to be quiet and when to actually slip your opinion in there of what you think it should sound like
Yeah.
as well.
If you're the engineer, your opinion, depending on your relationship with people, most of the time they're not going to ask your opinion until they have some respect for your work.
Yeah.
So when you just get started, it's hard to hold back because we all have opinions.
Yeah.
And we all experience this, right? So, oftentimes when I first started, people would ask my opinion, and I was almost afraid to say it because I didn't want to get fired for saying the wrong thing. I didn't quite know, what the limits were. But as, I gained more experience, I knew when it's the right time to say something and when it's absolutely the wrong time. When the A&R guy is in the room and the artist is there and the producer is there and their friends are there, you don't say, hey, that vocal performance was really lame. That's not a good time to say it. You have to, wait till the right time.
But obviously, in terms of giving your opinion, people come to you because I'm assuming you have a certain sound that they like to hear. So what would that sound be?
Well, I think that most often people are interested in how do I get the record to jump out, whether it's from the drums or the vocal. It's the energy. My mixes tend to have energy. I think that's the best way I could describe it. So drums, vocals, that's a big part. But through the years, I think it's been pretty broad now. So it's pretty broad.
So how do you get in terms of energy? How are you creating that energy within the mix?
That's a good question. Each song is different. And the way I approach mixing is I'll listen to the song and I don't just listen to the kick and solo it and do EQs. I listen to the whole thing and see what we have. It could be a mess. It could be what I mean by a mess, that could be just 100 parts, and I have to understand how they're working together. And then the chorus generally has to lift in a song, and the song generally has to build. So if I'm going to mix the record, I have to see how the arrangement develops, because usually the song is coming to me and I didn't engineer it. I do sometimes engineer and mix, but oftentimes they come to me to mix. It's done. So I have to understand what they're going for.
Do they give you a brief generally?
Does
the label give you a brief or the artist give you a brief?
Yeah, the producer or someone will come to me and say, this is kind of what we're looking for. And they'll tell me what their concerns are sometimes. They might say, hey, this feels like we got it, but can you bring a little bit more out of the chorus? And here's our rough mix. And this is what I like about it, but this is what I don't like about it. And that gives me a great idea. Sometimes they'll say, here's our rough mix, but it's just not right. So do your own thing with it. And other times they'll say, recently I got a record and, they said, we love the rough mix. I mean, we don't want you to change anything. We just need some magic in there. We don't know what it is, but don't change too much. And sometimes, when I hear it, I say, okay, I understand what they love about it. It may just be to smooth out the bottom end a touch, or it might be to make the vocals, pop a little more, or develop the arrangement so it doesn't. So over the 3 minutes, it turns into something more exciting at the end. It might be just a little bit.
Yeah. So in terms of that energy, do you think that energy, or you're calling energy, I'm trying to understand, is in fact the instinct of your ears mixing?
Instinct is everything. I think instinct is a big part of it.
Yeah.
So, we all hear music differently. I might like the Beatles. I love the Beatles. and you might like the Doors.
Mm-hmm.
The camera guy might like Rolling Stones. That might be. So we all hear things differently. We've all got life experiences that we're familiar with, and music that we're familiar with that we bring to the project.
Mm-hmm.
So in our tastes, that's a part of it, right? So I guess whether we play the guitar or we mix or we engineer, these influences affect the way we work and what we bring to the...
Mm-hmm. I guess a good point I'm just thinking is a lot of people ask us, how do we sound like, Christina Agulera, for instance, which you've mixed on the radio. What are the elements that is it getting obviously a good source recording, which is important, and then, which I'm assuming she would get great source recordings.
Yeah, she can sing, So a big part of it is, listen, it begins with the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a great instrument, I love to use McCartney because McCartney's his voice, of course, it's recognizable and it's familiar. Paul McCartney we're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. So
that Beatles guy.
That Beatles guy.
Yeah.
So,
Right
the microphone loves his voice. He's got a great instrument, right?
Yeah.
And you hear Aretha and she's got a great instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And if you play, a beautiful, Les Paul or something, it's got a great instrument. It starts with the instrument. And then the idea is how are you going to get that the musician's performance
Mm-hmm.
through the instrument of either the voice or the guitar or the bass or the solo violin or whatever. How do we record that? How do we capture that so that the listener gets it?
Yeah.
Right? That's what we're doing. We're transferring the performance
Mm-hmm.
to the tape.
Yeah. And in terms of, I guess, because a lot of our market are home recording guys, do you ever use within the studio, I guess in the recording side of things, home mics? Are there any? I know like 57s are used. Well, I don't know if Christina uses 57. Most likely
A lot of,
not.
you know what? Christina on a 57 sounds better than me on a $10,000 mic any day, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm sure that she could record on a 57 if she wanted to,
Mm-hmm.
and it'd sound fabulous. I never recorded Sade, but I hear she uses a 57.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that Michael Jackson uses an SM7. Now, these aren't terribly expensive mics now. Again, oftentimes there are demos and someone uses, a Shure SM58 or 57. These are $100. No, they're not going to break the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And
Good all round as well for other purposes.
sure,
Yeah.
you can use them from everything to, hammer a nail into, record.
Floss the teeth.
Yeah, whatever you need, right? So, the idea though is a great performance captured through a decent mic is better than an awful performance captured by an incredible mic.
So what is the secret to getting that sound? Obviously you've got to have a good tool from the artist to start with, and then get a good recording. Is there any other secrets within there? Obviously the mix side of things is probably where it all comes alive once you get a good bass.
Yep.
What are some secrets that you feel maybe home users aren't using or utilising?
The biggest secret, I say it over and over whenever I'm asked, is you got to keep it simple. With all the technology we have today, anybody can go out and buy a computer. They can all buy an interface. They can all buy a microphone.
Mm-hmm.
And the danger is that we start turning knobs and doing too much when really
we have 100 plugins.
You've got 100 plugins.
I have to use them. I pay good money for that plugin.
That's right. You've got to use them on every channel.
Yeah.
All the time. Get your money's worth.
Yeah.
But really, sometimes it's the simplicity of it. And I think more often it's the simplicity. You got to do the most musical thing, which tends to be oftentimes the simplest thing. And that may just be, a light compressor on the vocal, run it in, move on, next track.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if you're going to go for an effect or you want, there's a second side of this, which is, those recordings can be very boring if you don't do something interesting, and that's the creative part of it. But in order to record the performance onto your workstation or Pro Tools or whatever you're using,
Mm-hmm.
all right, it's easy to mess it up by overdoing it. So I think simplicity, my college professor used to say, simplicity swings the hardest.
That's true.
So I live by it. I think simplicity is the thing.
And in terms of, so when you get a mix and you've got all the tracks up on your desk, what's your workflow from start to finish, roughly?
Well, we talked about the conversation we have with the producer and the artist,
Mhm.
the A&R guy, the record company. Then when I'm in the room, I'll usually throw up all the faders and listen. And then I'll move the drums or I'll move the guitar and I'll just start,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's
Getting
almost
a rough
like,
level.
yeah, getting a rough level. It's
Mhm.
almost like building a sculpture.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I don't build the foot and then move on. I'm kind of just chiseling away at the whole kind of.
Do you don't start at the drums or the? Do you start at the kick and the drum first, or?
I don't. I
No?
used to, and that
Because
there
that's
are
a traditional
times.
sense. Most people think.
Yep, a
Start
lot
with
of
the
people say start with the kick and
Yeah.
start with the drums, but then yeah, you might have a great kick. We just talked about this the other
Yeah.
day in an interview with Michael
Yeah.
Lasco. So again, you solo the kick, you listen to it for 3 hours, and you
Mhm.
get a great kick. Super. No one's going to buy that.
Mhm.
That record is not important. The important record is the one that all the instruments work together as a whole, because that's really what the listener's going to hear. So I put them up, I listen, and you know what? Absolutely, I'll solo the kick and I'll listen to it and I'll make an adjustment and then I'll take it out and I'll listen to how that works with everything else. Then I'll solo the bass and listen to how that works. So we make our adjustments, but we can't get so focused on the individual instrument that we lose sight of the whole picture. The whole picture is to make the song work and make the performance and the artist stand out.
So when you're EQ, I'm just trying to picture, when you're EQing the kick, for instance,
Mhm.
do you have a preconceived idea of what it should sound like? Are you EQing it and then unsoloing the kick to see what it sounds like within the mix?
Well, more often than not, the record is playing and it'll occur to me that the kick is a little thin, for example, or a little bright. So what I'll normally do is just reach over and turn the EQ or go into the plug-in and make an adjustment. And I'll solo it, I'll turn the EQ on, I'll turn it off, I'll listen, what's the difference? Okay, and I'll put it right back in the mix and I'll say, did I achieve what I wanted to achieve? And again, the danger is that you sit and listen to that kick for 20 minutes and you forget that, no, okay, it's got to work in the mix, because what you do with the kick is going to affect the bass and it's going to affect, you know, the way the bottom end works and everything else.
It's interesting because I would have imagined, the way I picture it to happen is you start with a kick. What's interesting is that you're chiseling away. You kind of got the whole spectrum of everything happening,
Yeah.
and you're chiseling slowly to, creating that energy.
I think so, more often than not. But don't get me wrong. There's a time when, okay, I know exactly where I'm going. Because remember, you've got to learn the song. If I didn't write it and I didn't produce it, then I've got to understand what's being communicated from the artist in the production and the arrangement. And once I get that, and once I start, just kind of finessing the parts and just wading through the water, if you will, then things will occur to me. And they might come, oh my God, wait a minute, that vocal, I got a great idea. Let's put a couple of delays on it. Boom, 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 boom. Add the delays. Do I like it? Love it. Okay, let's go back. Okay, that created a certain atmosphere or feel in the record. So now, okay, wait a minute. This is a dance record. Let me do something with the drums to make it really punch out. Okay, so I'll address the drums and I might solo them for 5-10 minutes and listen to what I've got. But it's not with the individual instrument in mind. It's with the whole, with the whole arrangement in mind. So I'll solo them, add the bass, great. Listen to the whole record. How's it sound? Didn't do good, back it up, right? So we don't want to go too far because it's a give and take as we put the pieces into place. It's like a puzzle, right?
The big thing you see in forums worldwide is, how do I make my vocals stand out?
How do you make them stand
What's
out?
do you have not a preset, but do you have a standard formula that you follow in terms of EQing and compressing, or what's your?
There are a few things that won't get you in trouble that'll probably help. Each vocalist is different, and how that vocal is recorded is different. The microphone, the preamp, all that, the compressor. But, generally speaking, I like low compression ratio. Sometimes a high compression ratio is exactly what's needed, but generally speaking, I start low, and then if it needs more.
So have you got compressor at top of the chain?
As far as signal flow?
Signal flow, yeah.
In the mix? Okay, so if I'm in the mix, there's generally something, my process would be, if I needed to compress the vocal, it would be because of the texture or something that's going to add a quality to the voice. If it's just simply the level, I'll ride the vocal. I won't ask the compressor to do my job for me.
Okay, that's good too.
Okay, so and sometimes you compress the vocal, and then all of a sudden, you got to compress something else so that it mixes well together. And then you go to the next thing, you have to compress that. So when you start with lower ratios, it becomes,
You're adding the warmth of the compressor almost.
yeah, and I like the sound of the compressor, and it may be the tubes of the compressor, and I don't want any compression. It might be a texture thing,
Okay,
right?
so you're not using it to limit, if you like.
I do sometimes, but it depends on what's required or what's called for in the song. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, definitely.
So, and then, there are these records that I'll take a limiter and I'll smash the hell out of the vocal, and that's because that's the cool sound. You know, sometimes that's a really interesting effect, especially in pop music today. Vocals are squashed. I mean, they're just mashed. And that's because, you might have 140 tracks going on. You might have layered keyboards and drums and percussion and, everything else.
It's a big sound.
That's right. And sometimes that vocal just needs to be, mashed, in order to really sit on top of the mix. I think that, there is a point where you get diminishing returns. You compress the vocal, then all of a sudden the breaths pop out. You got to duck the breaths. You get yourself in trouble.
So in terms of EQing, I know every voice is different.
Yep.
But I'm just trying to visually picture it as well, the EQ. Do you use a lot of outboard or internal plugins?
I use a lot of plugins. These days, I love, outboard gear, okay? Plugins, they're great, they're close, but there's a characteristic of the, hardware that I like. Now, these days, record companies and film companies, there may be the artist manager, the film company, the record company, the A&R executive, the brother-in-law, the sister, the boyfriend. They all have something to say about the mix after it's done. So when you have to go back and call up all your hardware, that can be expensive, right? Go back in the studio. So, if I do use a piece of hardware, I will definitely print it, okay? But in terms of, by and large, inside the box, which is people, we always say, people ask me, do you mix in the box, in the computer? Yes, primarily. I love to spread it out across the SSL, but I think for the purposes of to answer your question, is you can get great sounds out of the plugins. No doubt about it. The Pultec plugins and these things, they do a really good job these days. And I love the idea that you can have 5 Pultecs in a plugin.
Absolutely.
You can use them in 5 spots and it doesn't cost you 60 grand.
And again, I think you knew what your answer is, but in terms of EQing the vocal, I know every vocal is different. Do you avoid top end? Is there something that you avoid when EQing vocals?
Well, it's interesting. These days I'm noticing that, on the radio, a lot of the vocals are super bright. There's a 5K boost on this stuff, and it's really bright, and it's a cool modern sound. In a couple of years that might change. In a couple of months it might change.
And it kind of gives it that clean sound as well, I think, in a way.
And sometimes, one EQ, a Pultec with 5K boost is going to sound totally different than, an Oxford EQ. So depending on which you choose, it should sound different. The Renaissance EQs, they're great. Do I avoid adding top end just for the sake of top end? Yeah, I don't want to add something just because. It's got to work for the song, right?
And in terms of your mix, do you have a plug-in on the master as well?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. This is another question I get all the time. What do you think about limiting? What do you think about,
Especially in the box, you get a lot of L1
Yeah.
Maxim, which gets, unfortunately, flogged a lot, which isn't that great.
But here's the thing.
Does the job, but.
And I usually, I do get asked this question a lot. And the answer is, yeah, in terms of sending a record out to an executive to hear it, if you come in the room with your mix, and I come in with my mix, and the songs are the same, and mine's louder, I'm winning.
Yeah.
That's the reality of the business these days.
Yeah.
Now, is it always the most musical thing to do? No, you have to try to do it musically. So assuming we're doing it musically, I don't see a problem with it. Mastering guys, they like to have a little headroom. They want to do their thing. And my feeling is, if I know the mastering guy, that's cool. But if I don't know where it's going, I may not want him to have a creative hand in that mix. I want it to be as close to 10 in a scale of good versus bad or complete versus incomplete.
So you put it to the limit. You put it to the...
I want to get this thing as close to perfect as I can.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to assume that he's going to add the right amount of low end or the right amount of high end
Mm-hmm.
or fix the mid-range. If I hear an issue, I want to get it as close to right as possible, because fixing it at mastering is dangerous. And to me, it's dangerous. I mean, there are great guys, but then there are bozos too, right? There are guys that are going to just add a top because they can and add a little bottom, and maybe that's not what's called for. So I do like to have pretty hot levels. I like to print hot, and I like to get it as close to what I'm hearing in my mind.
And what do you normally use at the end?
There's a couple of things. I like to, there's a easy gain stage. One is that in the master fader,
Mm-hmm.
if you overload it, I used to say red is your friend. I used to like to see a little red, and that's a very in sound now, to overload the buses and get that crunch.
Yeah.
That's cool. But I tend to put it in at a reasonable level. I don't want to overload the master fader.
So is your master hitting 0 as your peak?
It's generally coming in a few dB under.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I need to, I'll put an L1 or something on it, but I use it in
Mm-hmm.
a different way. I don't use the stock setting. I'll have a very long release, and you won't even see it doing anything. I'm only using it to adjust the gain.
Okay, yeah.
So
You're
as
lifting
you
it up,
lower the
the
threshold, it's going to increase the output. And once I see that little orange meter dipping,
Mm-hmm.
I say, too much. So, and you got to listen very carefully, because as
And the
you-
orange meter being the crunch on the
Yeah.
L1. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you have a long release time, you can hear it quickly.
Mhm.
If you have a really quick release time, you can miss some things, because especially in the low frequency, it'll open and close too quick on the low, on the bass and the kick and stuff like that. So that way you can safely get a good level.
Mhm.
And if you want to be a little bit crazy, then put a C1 or something after it and
Yeah.
try to get a little more. And I've always felt like I don't like to make one thing work too hard.
Mhm.
So I don't want, the way I work is I don't use one compressor at 10 to 1 and really mash it. I'll use 2 at 2 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just have them each do something gentle.
Riding along.
Yep.
Yep.
So 2 doing, it's almost like 2 horses pulling a cart
Mm-hmm.
instead of 1.
One big mama.
One big one, that's right. So
So in terms of your mixing, what is quite interesting, so do you, when you're leveling out and meter-wise, do you use VU meters, or are you going off the zero, like you zero your guide to know, okay, the kick's too loud?
I don't use the meters for much.
So it's just all ears?
Mostly, yeah. I mean, I'm going to look at the output and make
Yeah.
sure I'm not overloading stuff. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
look at the meters to tell me if something's loud or soft.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I just,
Because I think I know a lot of people have asked me, do I use, like when we're doing mixes, how do they gauge if something's too hot or not loud enough?
now these days the red light is on.
Yeah.
It's a telltale sign you're good to go, right? It's a little bit too loud when that thing is
Is hitting.
But, that can be a cool sound. I mean, overloading stuff has always been a good part of rock and roll.
Yeah.
Overdrive the amp. Cool, let's try it, That could be the best thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But generally speaking, no. I mean, the red lights aren't, blazing all day.
And in terms of, do you use Pro Tools, I'm assuming,
Love Pro
Yeah.
Tools. Yeah.
in the studio environment as well?
Yep, I have one
Yeah.
at home, and I have, we use it in the studio.
Okay,
So
fantastic. Well, I think we've got some good tips there.
I hope you got one.
Thanks for your time.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
we can our records can start sounding like some of those that you've mixed.
Better, I hope. Do better than me, please.
No, not at all. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.